Is your garden struggling no matter what you do? You might be unknowingly poisoning it with contaminants in your mulch or amendments, but what if there's a natural way to cleanse those inputs, turning harmful substances into beneficial nutrients? Get ready to unlock the secret power of fermentation to transform your garden materials from toxic to terrific. The silent threat in your garden: wood chips arrive at your garden gate looking perfect, fresh, aromatic, and ready to mulch your beds. That straw bale sitting in your truck bed appears clean and natural, yet beneath these innocent surfaces often lurks a chemical legacy that can devastate your soil ecosystem for years. Herbicide residues, particularly Aminopyralid and clopyralid from the pyridine carboxylic acid family, persist in plant materials even after the original crop has been harvested, baled, or chipped. These persistent herbicides pass through animal digestive systems unchanged, meaning manure and compost can carry them. They survive standard composting temperatures that kill pathogens and weed seeds, remaining active in your garden soil for up to 4 years. The damage unfolds in ways that baffle even experienced gardeners. Tomato leaves curl and twist into distorted shapes. Bean plants become stunted with cupped, malformed foliage. Composites like lettuce refuse to germinate or produce seedlings that die within days. You've done everything right with your soil preparation, watering, and care, yet plants fail to thrive. The problem isn't your skill but the invisible chemical contamination in materials you trusted. Research from Washington State University documented cases where aminopyralid contamination in compost caused complete crop failure in commercial vegetable operations, with residue levels as low as 10 parts per billion, proving sufficient to damage sensitive plants. The scope of this problem extends beyond obvious agricultural inputs. Municipal wood chip programs source material from roadside trimming operations where vegetation management often involves herbicide application. That free mulch from the tree service might come from properties treated with persistent chemicals. Straw production involves pre-harvest herbicide application to dry down crops, and these compounds remain in the straw structure. Even certified organic operations face contamination risk when neighboring conventional farms apply drift-prone herbicides during windy conditions. The assumption that natural-looking materials are safe has left countless gardens contaminated with compounds that undermine every effort to build healthy, living soil. Fermentation, nature's detoxifier, harnesses specific microbial metabolic pathways that break chemical bonds herbicides and pesticides depend on for their toxic activity. Lactobacillus species common in fermentation cultures produce enzymes that cleave the pyridine ring structures of persistent herbicides. Saccharomyces yeasts generate organic acids that chemically transform aromatic compounds into simpler molecules. These microbial processes don't just sequester contaminants or mask them. They genuinely dismantle the molecular structures that make these chemicals harmful, converting them into carbon dioxide, water, and simple organic compounds that soil organisms can metabolize as food. The Korean natural farming tradition has documented fermentation's detoxification power for decades, though Western science has been slower to validate these observations. Recent research from agricultural institutes in Asia confirms that lactic acid bacteria fermentation reduces organophosphate pesticide residues by 70 to 90% within 14 days. The mechanism involves both direct enzymatic breakdown and the production of biosurfactants that make pesticide molecules more accessible to degrading enzymes. The acidic environment created during fermentation, with pH levels dropping to 3.5 to 4.5, denatures certain pesticide molecules, while the alcohol and organic acid byproducts of fermentation serve as co-metabolites that accelerate the breakdown of recalcitrant compounds. Setting up a fermentation system for contaminated inputs requires basic materials you can source from any homebrew supply shop or online retailer. A 5-gallon food-grade bucket with a lid, an airlock to allow carbon dioxide escape while preventing oxygen entry, and your fermentation culture form the complete equipment list. The culture itself can be indigenous microorganisms captured from your local environment, commercial effective microorganism solutions, or simple lactobacillus serum made from rice wash water. The beauty of this approach lies in its accessibility. You need no laboratory equipment or specialized knowledge to initiate the cleansing process. The transformation process, from toxic to terrific, starts with preparing contaminated materials for fermentation by reducing their size to increase surface area for microbial access. Wood chips benefit from partial shredding or at minimum soaking to soften the outer surfaces. Straw should be chopped into 2 to 4 inch lengths. Place these materials in your fermentation vessel at a ratio of 1 part material to 2 parts liquid. The liquid component consists of non-chlorinated water mixed with your microbial culture at a 10% concentration and a carbohydrate source like molasses at 3% concentration. The molasses feeds the fermenting organisms, allowing them to multiply to populations dense enough to tackle chemical breakdown. Seal the vessel with your airlock and place it in a location where temperatures remain between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. Within 48 hours, you'll observe active fermentation as bubbles pass through the airlock and a pleasant sour smell develops. This initial phase sees explosive microbial growth as lactobacillus and yeast populations expand. The pH drops rapidly as organic acids accumulate, creating the acidic environment that begins chemical transformation. Persistent herbicides like Aminopyralid contain amine groups that become protonated in acidic conditions, making them vulnerable to hydrolytic breakdown. Monitor the fermentation by checking the airlock activity and smell. Active fermentation continues for 7 to 14 days, depending on temperature and contamination levels. After the initial vigorous phase, bubbling slows, but microbial activity continues. So, when you extend fermentation up to 30 days, you get maximum chemical breakdown, especially for those really heavily contaminated materials. Now, testing the finished product is a bit different. You'll need to do a bioassay, since most home gardeners don't have access to chemical analysis equipment. Here's what you do. Take a sample of the fermented material, mix it with clean potting soil at about a 25% concentration, and then plant some sensitive indicator crops, like tomatoes or beans. Healthy growth, without any of those characteristic herbicide damage symptoms. That means you've got successful decontamination. The transformation you'll see is honestly remarkable. Straw that started out golden and stiff comes out of fermentation darkened, softened, and already partially broken down. When it comes to wood chips, you'll notice they develop this fermented aroma, kind of like pickles or sourdough, which is a sure sign of active microbial colonization. The liquid part gets cloudy with microbial biomass and takes on a brownish color from leached organic compounds. And here's the cool part, this liquid itself turns into a valuable soil drench, rich in beneficial microorganisms and organic acids that keep the detoxification process going when you apply it to your garden beds. The fermentation process really delivers benefits that go way beyond just decontaminating stuff. As those microbes break down chemical contaminants, they're also pre-digesting the cellulose and lignin in wood chips and straw, making that carbon way more accessible to soil organisms. This pre-digestion step actually speeds up how quickly these amendments get integrated into your soil food web. Research on fermented plant materials shows increased populations of beneficial fungi and bacteria compared to non-fermented materials. So you're creating amendments that inoculate your soil as they nourish it. The organic acids produced during fermentation, especially lactic acid and acetic acid, chelate minerals in the wood and straw, which makes nutrients like calcium, magnesium, and trace elements much more available to your plants. Those same organic acids also stimulate root exudation when you add the material to your soil, encouraging your plants to release more compounds that feed the good microbes. This creates a positive feedback loop, where fermented amendments kick off increased biological activity that just keeps accelerating soil development. Studies measuring microbial respiration in soils amended with fermented versus non-fermented materials show, wow, 2 to 3 times higher biological activity in the fermented treatment. Gardens that get these fermented amendments show measurable improvements in plant health, going beyond what clean but non-fermented materials can provide. The diverse microbial populations you're introducing with fermented mulches colonize the rhizosphere, where they compete with pathogens and produce compounds that trigger systemic resistance in your plants. Trials comparing vegetable plots mulched with fermented wood chips versus standard wood chips show reduced incidence of foliar diseases and improved drought tolerance in the fermented treatment. The plants aren't just avoiding contamination damage, they're receiving active biological benefits that enhance their performance. Your clean garden revolution really starts when you take control of your input materials through fermentation, and, that removes the uncertainty that contamination introduces into organic gardening. Start with materials you suspect might carry residues, like municipal wood chips, straw from unknown sources, or manure-based composts that haven't been tested. Set up your first fermentation batch using a single 5-gallon bucket to prove the process before scaling up, and don't forget to document your results through the Bioassay method, growing sensitive plants in both fermented and non-fermented materials to see the difference with your own eyes. Common concerns about fermentation usually focus on odor and complexity, but proper technique addresses both. Well-managed fermentation with adequate sugar and the right microbial culture produces a pleasant sour smell, not the putrid odor of anaerobic rot. The process itself demands minimal time investment, just about 15 minutes to set up the fermentation, a few brief daily checks to make sure the airlock remains functional, and then the final processing when the batch is done. This small-time commitment really does purchase freedom from contamination anxiety and transforms suspect materials into premium soil amendments. The broader implications of fermentation-based decontamination extend to community food security and environmental health. As persistent herbicides become more prevalent in agricultural systems, the ability to cleanse contaminated materials prevents these chemicals from accumulating in home gardens and urban farms. Each gardener who adopts fermentation techniques becomes a node in a decentralized decontamination network processing materials that would otherwise spread contamination or just go to waste. This knowledge empowers communities to reclaim materials from the waste stream and transform them into real assets for soil building. Begin your fermentation practice this week by gathering your equipment and sourcing a microbial culture. Test the process on a small batch of wood chips or straw, and then, as your confidence grows, go ahead and expand. Subscribe to the Living Soil Lab for detailed demonstrations of fermentation techniques and ongoing updates on soil remediation strategies that put biological processes to work solving real-world gardening challenges. Share this guide with gardeners in your community who have struggled with mysterious plant problems that might trace to contaminated inputs, and together we'll build gardens where every amendment strengthens rather than undermines our soil ecosystems.